stop everything you're doing right now. Because what I'm about to tell you is going to completely reshape the way you see yourself, your relationships, your career, and your future. You've been lied to, not by a stranger, not by someone who wanted to hurt you, but by the one voice you've trusted more than any other voice in your entire life, the voice inside your own head. That voice has been whispering the same dangerous lie every single day in 100 different ways. You're not enough. And here's what makes that lie so deadly. You believed it. You built your entire life around it. You made decisions based on it. You chose relationships because of it. You stayed silent in rooms where you should have spoken. You said yes when every cell in your body was screaming no. You shrunk yourself, dimmed your light, and handed your worth over to other people like loose change. Here's what nobody ever told you growing up: the quality of your entire life. Every relationship you've differently. Your decisions will feel different. Your relationships will look different. And the way you walk into a room, that quiet, grounded confidence that you've always admired in certain people, that will be yours too. This isn't motivation. This is a complete rewiring. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Hidden Crisis. Nobody talks about. Let me ask you something personal. When was the last time you were genuinely kind to yourself? Not a spa day, not a cheat meal, not a Netflix binge that you justified as self-care. I mean, truly, deeply, honestly kind. The way you'd be to someone you love unconditionally. If you're struggling to remember, you're not alone. Here's a number that should shake you. Research consistently shows that more than 85% of people carry some form of low self-worth into their daily lives. Let that sink in. 8 out of 10 people you pass on the street today are operating from a quiet, invisible belief that they are somehow not enough, not smart enough, not attractive enough, not successful enough, not lovable enough. That's not a personal failing. That's an epidemic. And the most insidious part? Most people don't even know it's happening. They don't wake up and think, I don't love myself today. Instead, they just feel vaguely restless, vaguely anxious, like something important is always just slightly out of reach. They keep chasing the next relationship, the next job title, the next Instagram milestone, convinced that once they get that thing, they'll finally feel okay. But they never do, because the thing they're actually looking for isn't out there. It never was. The invisible filter. Think about this. Every single experience in your life passes through a filter before it reaches you. That filter is made up of what you believe about yourself deep down, at the core level. And if that filter is built on self-doubt, self-criticism, and self-rejection, then even the best experiences get distorted. Someone gives you a genuine compliment and your filter says they're just being nice. You get a promotion and your filter says, wait until they find out I'm a fraud. A romantic partner tells you they love you and your filter says, if they really knew me, they'd leave. This is not a logic problem. This is not about intelligence or education or life experience. This is about a deep, often unconscious relationship you have with yourself, one that was shaped long before you had any say in the matter. The voice you carry everywhere. Here's a thought experiment. Imagine a friend, someone who has been with you every single day of your life, from the moment you woke up this morning to the last thing you thought about before falling asleep last night. Now, imagine that this friend, without fail, did the following. Every time you made a mistake, they reminded you of it for weeks. Every time you tried something new, they whispered that you'd probably fail. Every time someone treated you badly, they said it was probably your fault. Every time you succeeded at something, they immediately pointed out the next thing you weren't good enough at yet. Would you keep that friend in your life? Of course not. You cut them off immediately. You'd recognize that relationship as toxic, draining, and destructive. But here's the uncomfortable truth. That's exactly the relationship most people have with themselves. The voice in your head is often the most relentless critic you will ever encounter. It knows every weakness, every fear, every embarrassing memory, and it uses that intimate knowledge against you day after day with devastating precision. You would never speak to someone you love the way you speak to yourself. Read that again. Let it land. What self-rejection actually costs you. The price of not loving yourself isn't just emotional. It shows up everywhere. It shows up in the career you almost pursued but talked yourself out of. It shows up in the relationship you stayed in 3 years, too long because you didn't think you could do better. It shows up in the friendships where you give everything and receive nothing because deep down you don't believe you deserve reciprocity. It shows up in the opportunities you watched other people take while you stood on the sidelines, convinced you weren't ready. Self-rejection is not a private internal experience. It leaks out into every corner of your life. It shapes your posture, your tone of voice, the way you enter a room, the way you exit a conversation. People can feel it, not because there's something visibly wrong with you, but because energy doesn't lie. Neuroscience backs this up. People who operate from low self-worth show significantly higher activity in the brain's threat detection system. Their nervous system is in a constant low-grade state of alert, scanning for danger, bracing for rejection, anticipating criticism, even in completely safe environments. This chronic hypervigilance is exhausting, and it doesn't leave much room for the kind of open, curious, bold engagement with life that actually leads to growth and joy. The difference that changes everything. Now here's the contrast. Think about someone in your life who seems genuinely comfortable in their own skin. You know the type. They're not arrogant. They're not loud. They don't need to dominate every room or prove anything to anyone. But there's something about them, a quiet solidity, a warmth, a groundedness that draws people in. They make decisions without agonizing over what everyone will think. They handle criticism without falling apart. They bounce back from setbacks faster than seems humanly possible. They seem to attract good people, good opportunities, good experiences, almost effortlessly. What's their secret? It's not their appearance. It's not their background. It's not their intelligence or their bank account. It's that they have a fundamentally different relationship with themselves. They've learned, consciously or not, to be on their own side, to treat themselves as a valued, worthy, capable human being, to source their confidence from the inside rather than waiting for the outside world to provide it. That's what we're building here. Not a performance of confidence, not a highlight reel version of self-love, the real thing, the kind that holds up when life gets hard, the kind that doesn't require constant external reinforcement. And here's what makes this so powerful. Self-love is not a personality trait you're either born with or you're not. It's a skill. It can be learned. It can be practiced. It can be strengthened. and it can completely transform your life from the inside out. Chapter 2. What's happening in your brain? Right now, you might be thinking, this sounds good, but isn't it just feel-good psychology? No, it's neuroscience. What you believe about yourself has measurable physical effects on your brain, and understanding this doesn't just make self-love feel more legitimate. It gives you a practical map for how to actually change. The brain on self-worth. When you experience genuine self-appreciation, when you acknowledge your own effort, when you treat yourself with compassion, when you validate your own worth without waiting for someone else to do it, your brain's reward circuitry activates, dopamine flows, serotonin rises, the same chemistry that makes connection, achievement, and joy feel good. That chemistry is available to you from the inside through the simple act of being on your own side. This isn't metaphor. Brain imaging studies have confirmed it. Self-compassion activates the same neural reward systems as receiving love from someone else. Your brain does not distinguish between being cared for by another person and genuinely caring for yourself. Let that land for a moment. Now here's the other side of the equation. When you engage in self-criticism, when you mentally replay your failures, berate yourself for not being further along, compare yourself unfavorably to others, your brain doesn't register this as motivation. It registers it as threat. The same brain systems that respond to physical danger activate in response to harsh self-judgment. This is why self-attack literally hurts, not metaphorically, neurologically. The brain processes the pain of self-rejection through the same pathways as physical pain. When people describe heartbreak as feeling like a punch to the chest or describe shame as a crushing weight, they're not exaggerating. They're being precise. The stress spiral. When your brain perceives threat, whether that threat is a bear in the woods or your own inner critic telling you you're a failure, it initiates a stress response. Cortisol floods your system. Your thinking narrows. Creativity shuts down. Strategic planning goes offline. You shift from the open, curious, forward-moving mode that drives growth into a defensive, reactive, survival-focused mode that just tries to get through the next moment. And if this happens repeatedly, if your inner dialogue is chronically threatening, critical, or harsh, you essentially live in this stressed state. You make decisions from a place of fear rather than wisdom. You avoid risks that might lead to growth. You choose the familiar over the fulfilling, the safe over the meaningful. This isn't weakness. This is biology. Your nervous system is doing exactly what it was designed to do: protect you. The problem is that it can't tell the difference between a real threat and a thought you're having about yourself. It responds to both the same way. The rewiring that's possible. Here's where it gets genuinely exciting. Your brain is not fixed. It's not locked into the patterns laid down in childhood or by years of negative self-talk. Neuroplasticity, your brain's ability to physically restructure itself based on repeated experience, means that every time you choose a different way of relating to yourself, you are literally building new neural pathways every single time. It works like this. Every experience you have, every thought, every emotional response, every behavior activates a pattern of neurons in your brain. When you repeat an experience, those neurons fire together again. And the more they fire together, the more efficiently they connect. The pathway becomes faster, more automatic, more like your default. This is how habits form. This is how personalities are shaped. And this is exactly how you can reshape your relationship with yourself. When you practice self-compassion, repeatedly, consistently, even when it feels forced at first, you are not just changing how you feel in the moment. You are strengthening neural circuits associated with self-acceptance, emotional resilience, and psychological safety. Over time, these circuits become your brain's new default. Self-love stops being something you have to remember to do and starts being simply who you are. The chemicals of caring for yourself. There's another piece of this worth knowing. When you comfort yourself during difficult moments, when you place a hand on your chest during stress, when you speak to yourself with genuine kindness, your brain releases oxytocin, the same bonding hormone released during deep connection between people. This is why self-love is not selfish. When you care for yourself, your brain experiences something physiologically similar to being loved, and a brain that feels loved is more generous, more resilient, more creative, more open to genuine connection with others. Self-love doesn't shrink your capacity to love. It expands it. The brain regions most strongly associated with emotional regulation, wise decision-making, and genuine confidence actually grow with consistent self-compassion practice. Brain imaging shows increased cortical thickness in people who regularly direct loving kindness toward themselves. Your self-love practice is, quite literally, growing the most important parts of your brain, and the threat center, the amygdala, the alarm system that keeps so many people in chronic hypervigilance, becomes less reactive in people who practice self-acceptance. You stop seeing danger where none exists. You stop taking things personally. You stop overreacting to minor setbacks as though they're catastrophic. Your entire nervous system recalibrates towards safety, openness, and possibility. This is why the path forward isn't about trying harder, pushing more, or criticizing yourself into growth. It's about creating the internal conditions, the neurochemical environment, that makes growth natural, sustainable, and even enjoyable. Chapter 3. How you were taught to reject yourself. You were not born hating yourself. This is important to understand not as an excuse, but as a starting point. Before the world had a chance to get to you, before school, before criticism, before comparison, before social media, you were perfectly okay with being exactly who you were. You needed something, you asked for it. You felt something, you expressed it. You didn't rehearse your personality or shrink yourself to fit someone else's comfort zone. You simply existed, fully and without apology. Somewhere along the way that changed, and understanding how it changed is one of the most compassionate and empowering things you can do for yourself, because it means you can stop blaming yourself for a pattern you didn't choose and start consciously building something new. The first lessons. The earliest and most powerful messages about your worth came from your caregivers. Not because they were bad people. Most parents are doing the absolute best they can with what they have, but because they were also shaped by their own wounds, their own conditioning, their own unhealed patterns. If love in your home was conditional, if praise came when you performed well and withdrawal came when you didn't, your young brain drew a logical conclusion. My worth depends on what I do, not on who I am. This isn't something you consciously decided. It was absorbed deeply and completely the way a sponge absorbs water. Maybe you learned that your emotions were inconvenient, that crying was dramatic, that anger was dangerous, that needing things was a burden. So you learned to fold those parts of yourself away, to tuck them into the quieter corners of your personality, to present only the version of you that seemed safest and most acceptable. Maybe love in your home was unpredictable, warm one moment, cold the next, generous sometimes and withdrawn others. And your nervous system, trying desperately to make sense of this, landed on the only explanation it could find. There's something wrong with me. If I could just be better, more, different, then I'd get the love I need. Children are not equipped to conclude that the adults around them are struggling. So instead, they conclude that they are the problem. What school added then came school and a whole new layer of messaging. School systems at their core are designed around conformity. There is a right answer and a wrong answer. There is a normal way to learn, a normal pace, a normal set of interests. Children who think differently, learn differently, feel differently, they often spend years receiving the implicit message that their natural way of being is a problem to be corrected. The kid who asked too many questions was told to stop disrupting class. The sensitive child who cried easily was told to toughen up. The creative spirit who couldn't sit still was labeled as difficult. The quiet introvert who needed time alone was called antisocial. Bit by bit, these experiences chip away at your natural self-acceptance. You start to believe that the authentic version of you, the unpolished, unfiltered, fully alive version, is somehow too much or not enough or just plain wrong. The cultural layer. On top of the personal and educational programming comes the cultural layer. And this one is relentless. From the moment you were old enough to consume media, you were handed a set of standards: how you should look, how you should act, what you should achieve, what kind of life you should want. These standards are not neutral. They are designed, often quite deliberately, to make you feel inadequate, because inadequacy drives consumption. The beauty industry profits from your self-doubt. The comparison culture of social media profits from your envy. The achievement culture profits from your relentless drive to prove yourself. None of this is accidental, and none of it is your fault. But if you're not aware of it, you absorb it all as truth. You hold yourself up against an impossible, digitally curated, commercially motivated standard, and then you blame yourself for falling short. The birth of the inner critic. Here's where it all comes together. At some point, you stopped needing the external voices to criticize you. You'd internalize them so thoroughly that you started doing it yourself. The inner critic, that relentless voice that tells you you're not enough, that predicts failure, that replays your worst moments on an endless loop, is not your original voice. It's a compilation. It's made of fragments of every critical parent, every harsh teacher, every cultural message, every comparison, every moment of shame you ever experienced, assembled by your brain and set on autopilot to run the show. And because it's been running for so long, it feels like you. It feels like your voice, your truth, your accurate assessment of reality. It's not. Understanding this doesn't instantly silence the voice, but it does something just as important. It creates distance. It allows you to hear the criticism and recognize it for what it is: a learned pattern, not a life sentence. The good news, and this is genuinely good news, is that learned patterns can be unlearned. Neural pathways built by years of self-rejection can be dismantled bit by bit and replaced by something entirely different. Not through sheer willpower, but through conscious, consistent, compassionate practice. That's exactly what the next chapters are going to give you. Chapter 4, The Approval Trap, and how it's running your life. Here's a question worth sitting with honestly. When was the last time you made a decision, a real decision about something that mattered, without first running it through the filter of what will people think? If you're struggling to answer that, you're not weak, you're not shallow, you're not uniquely insecure. You're human. And you've been living inside one of the most sophisticated psychological traps ever constructed. The addiction to external validation. This addiction is so normalized in our culture that most people don't even recognize it as a problem. They think it's just being considerate, being humble, being realistic about their limitations. But underneath all those reasonable-sounding justifications is a single, devastating truth. You've handed the keys to your self-worth over to other people, and they're driving your life. How the trap works external validation addiction doesn't look the same in everyone. Sometimes it's obvious. Constantly checking your phone for likes, replaying conversations to analyze whether people seem to like you, feeling a physical drop in your mood when a text goes unanswered too long. But sometimes it's subtler, more disguised. It's the version of you that works 70-hour weeks, not because you love the work, but because you need the title and the recognition that come with it. It's the person who stays in a relationship they've outgrown because breaking up would mean disappointing someone. It's the one who has a drawer full of unfinished creative projects, paintings, manuscripts, business ideas that never see the light of day because what if people don't like them? It's the constant editing of your authentic self to match whatever room you happen to be in. Here's what's happening underneath all of it. When you don't have a stable internal sense of worth, you outsource the job. You let other people's reactions, opinions, approval, and attention become your moment-to-moment measurement of whether you're okay. And this feels rational, even necessary, because without that external input, there's just silence. And in that silence, the fear is deafening. Why external validation can never be enough. The fundamental problem with building your self-worth on external validation is that it's built on shifting sand. Other people's opinions change, their mood changes, their circumstances change. Someone who praised you enthusiastically last month might barely notice you this month. Not because you changed, but because they changed. Their attention moved somewhere else. Their insecurities shifted. Their priorities evolved. And if your sense of worth is tied to their response, you go down with them. There's also a deeper problem. People often validate the wrong things. They praise your productivity, but not your kindness. They admire your success, but not your courage. They approve of the polished, curated, presentable version of you, and ignore or misunderstand the parts that are actually most real and most valuable. So you end up working harder and harder to maintain an image that doesn't even represent who you truly are. Chasing validation for a version of yourself you don't even particularly like. Psychologists call this the hedonic treadmill. Every hit of approval gives you a temporary lift. Then your baseline returns, and you need the next hit, the next compliment, the next achievement, the next milestone. You're always moving, always performing, always reaching, and the destination keeps sliding forward just out of reach. It's exhausting. and it never ever ends. The social media amplifier, this dynamic has always existed in human psychology. But the digital age has turned up the volume to an almost unbearable level. Social media platforms are not neutral spaces. They are engineered, deliberately, by some of the brightest minds in technology to exploit your brain's validation-seeking circuitry. Every like, every comment, every share triggers a small release of dopamine. Your brain learns. Perform, post, wait for response, feel good, repeat. The problem is that you start curating your life for the camera instead of living it for yourself. You begin to evaluate experiences not by how they actually feel, but by how they look. You filter your emotions, your relationships, even your opinions through the lens of what will this communicate about me? And slowly, without realizing it, you lose touch with the part of you that actually knows what it wants, needs, and values. The moment everything shifts, breaking free from the approval trap doesn't mean becoming indifferent to others. It doesn't mean refusing feedback or becoming arrogant. It means making a fundamental shift in where your sense of worth originates. Here's the distinction that changes everything. Appreciation is when you enjoy recognition without needing it. Addiction is when you require recognition to feel okay. You can receive a compliment with genuine warmth while knowing that your value doesn't depend on it. You can read a critical comment without feeling like your entire sense of self is under attack. You can make a decision that disappoints someone important to you and still know deep in your bones that you made the right call. This is internal validation, and it is learnable. It begins with a simple but radical practice, starting to become your own witness. Instead of constantly scanning the external environment for signals about your worth, you turn your attention inward. You ask yourself, what do I actually think about this? What do I actually feel? What actually matters to me, independent of what anyone else will say about it? These questions feel almost dangerously simple, but for someone who has spent years outsourcing their self-assessment, they can be genuinely revolutionary. The path forward isn't about needing others less. It's about needing yourself more, about becoming a reliable, trustworthy, compassionate presence in your own inner world, about being someone whose opinion of themselves is the one that ultimately matters most. When you build that internal foundation, when your worth is no longer something you're constantly borrowing from other people, you become free. Not free from caring what others think, but free from being controlled by it. And that freedom changes everything. Chapter 5. The 4 Pillars of Unshakable Self-Love. Now we get practical. Everything up to this point has been about understanding the problem, understanding your brain, understanding how your patterns were formed, understanding the trap you've been living in. And that understanding matters enormously. You can't build something new on a foundation you can't see, but understanding alone doesn't change you. Practice does. What follows is the foundation system for genuine, lasting self-love. Not the kind you perform for others. Not the kind that requires everything to be going well. The kind that holds when you fail, when you're rejected, when life is genuinely hard, and when the gap between where you are and where you want to be feels impossibly wide. This foundation rests on 4 pillars. Each one is essential. Each one supports the others. And together they create something that no external circumstance can take away from you. Pillar 1, self-awareness. You cannot love what you don't know. This sounds obvious, but most people are genuinely, surprisingly unfamiliar with themselves. They know their preferences in restaurants and their opinions about current events, but they don't know what triggers their anger or what drives their self-sabotage. They don't know why certain people drain them and others energize them. They don't know what they actually want versus what they've been told to want. Self-awareness is the practice of becoming genuinely curious about your own inner world, not as a judge, but as an interested, compassionate observer. Start with your internal dialogue. What tone does the voice in your head use with you throughout the day? Not occasionally, all day. When your alarm goes off in the morning, what's the first thing that voice says? When you look in the mirror, what does it say? When you make a mistake at work, what does it say? When you're lying in bed at night, what does it say? Most people, when they first pay close attention to this, are genuinely shocked. The harshness, the relentlessness, the intimately precise cruelty of the inner critic, it's stunning when you actually notice it clearly for the first time. Next, pay attention to your emotional patterns. What consistently makes you feel contracted, small, or drained? What consistently makes you feel expanded, energized, and alive? These aren't trivial preferences. They're data about who you actually are and what you actually need. Notice your behavioral patterns, too. Where do you consistently show up fully? And where do you consistently hold back? What do you keep starting and never finishing? What do you keep agreeing to that you immediately regret? What situations reliably bring out the best version of you, and which ones reliably bring out the worst? Self-awareness doesn't require years of therapy or meditation retreats. It requires the simple, consistent practice of paying attention, gently, non-judgmentally, with genuine curiosity, to your own experience. Pillar 2, self-acceptance. This is the pillar that most people resist most fiercely, because we've been sold a story that says self-acceptance is the enemy of growth. That if you accept yourself as you are, you'll stop trying to improve. That self-acceptance is another word for complacency, for lowering your standards, for settling. That story is wrong, and it's doing enormous damage. Self-acceptance doesn't mean you're satisfied with everything about yourself or that you've given up on growth. It means you acknowledge what's real right now, today, without adding a layer of shame and self-rejection on top of it. Here's the paradox. You cannot genuinely change anything you haven't first accepted. Resistance creates rigidity. When you fight against parts of yourself, when you hate your anxiety, shame your anger, reject your sensitivity, deny your ambition, those parts don't disappear. They go underground. And from underground, they run your life in ways you can't even see. Acceptance brings things into the light, and in the light, they can actually change. Self-acceptance means looking at your whole self, the parts you're proud of and the parts you're not, and saying, this is what's real right now. I'm not going to pretend otherwise, and I'm not going to punish myself for it. It means accepting your history, not because everything that happened was okay, but because what happened, happened. And your continued resistance to that reality is costing you energy you need for your present and your future. It means accepting your emotions, all of them, including the ones that feel ugly or inconvenient or socially unacceptable. Your anger, your envy, your grief, your fear. These are not signs that something is wrong with you. They are signs that you are human, fully, completely human. Pillar 3, self-compassion. If self-awareness is how you see yourself clearly and self-acceptance is how you hold what you see without rejection, self-compassion is how you respond to what's difficult. And it is, without question, the most powerful antidote to the inner critic. Self-compassion is not self-pity. It's not making excuses. It's not lowering your standards. Research consistently shows that people who treat themselves with compassion during failure and setbacks actually perform better, recover faster, and take more accountability for their mistakes, precisely because they're not paralyzed by shame. Here's the simplest possible definition of self-compassion. Treating yourself the way you would treat someone you genuinely love who is going through something hard. Think about how you respond when a close friend comes to you devastated about a mistake they made. You don't say, "Well, honestly, you've been making these kinds of mistakes for years. You really should have known better. I don't know what's wrong with you." You listen. You offer perspective. You remind them of their worth. You help them find a way forward. That same quality of response is available to you toward yourself in every difficult moment, every failure, every setback, every moment of doubt or fear or inadequacy. It just requires practice because, for most people, extending genuine compassion to themselves feels almost foreign at first. It feels uncomfortable, even wrong, like they don't deserve it. And that discomfort itself is evidence of how urgently they need it. Start small. When something goes wrong, when you make a mistake, when you fall short of your own expectations, before the inner critic takes over, pause. Put your hand on your chest, take a slow breath, and ask yourself, what do I actually need right now? Not what do I deserve, what do I need? Maybe you need to hear that this doesn't define you. Maybe you need permission to feel what you're feeling without judgment. Maybe you need a reminder that imperfection is part of being alive, not evidence of personal failure. Give yourself what you need. It's not weakness. It's the most powerful thing you can do. Pillar 4, self-care. The fourth pillar is the one that gets the most attention culturally and is also the most misunderstood. Real self-care is not aesthetic. It's not a bubble bath or a luxury purchase, though those things can be genuinely restorative in the right context. Real self-care is the ongoing, sometimes mundane, sometimes difficult practice of taking responsibility for your own well-being, physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. Physical self-care means treating your body as a valued partner in your life, rather than a vehicle you run into the ground and expect to keep performing. It means sleeping enough, not as a reward for a productive day, but as a non-negotiable foundation for everything else. It means moving your body in ways that feel good, eating food that actually nourishes you, and seeking help when your physical health needs attention. Emotional self-care means actively managing your emotional environment. It means creating boundaries around relationships and situations that consistently drain or damage you. It means finding healthy outlets for difficult emotions rather than stuffing them down or venting them destructively. It means surrounding yourself, as much as possible, with people who bring out the better parts of you. Mental self-care means paying attention to what you feed your mind, not in a rigid, joyless way, but with genuine awareness. Hours of content designed to trigger outrage, inadequacy, or comparison have a measurable effect on your mental state. So does time spent learning, creating, thinking deeply, engaging with ideas that genuinely interest you. Spiritual self-care, regardless of your religious beliefs or lack thereof, means nurturing your sense of connection to something beyond your own individual concerns. This might look like time in nature, creative practice, meditation, community, or service. It's about maintaining contact with the part of you that knows your life has meaning beyond your productivity metrics. Together, these four pillars, self-awareness, self-acceptance, self-compassion, and self-care, create a foundation that doesn't crack under pressure. When the storms come, and they will come, you have something solid to stand on. Not perfection, not constant positivity, solid ground. Chapter 6. Silencing the Inner Critic. For good. Let's talk about the voice. You know the one. The voice that comments on everything you do with an endless stream of judgment, doubt, comparison, and worst-case prediction. The one that sounds the most like you. The one you've been listening to so long you've stopped noticing it's even there. That voice is not your friend, and it's time to stop treating it like one. What the inner critic actually is. Here's something that sounds simple but is genuinely liberating when you really internalize it. The inner critic is not you. It is not your authentic voice. It is not an accurate reflection of your worth or your potential. It is a collection, a compilation of every harsh message, every critical voice, every impossible standard, every moment of shame you've ever absorbed, running on autopilot in the background of your consciousness. It developed for a reason. When you were young and dependent on others for survival, your brain needed to monitor for threats to belonging. Criticism from the outside was dangerous, so your brain got ahead of it by criticizing from the inside first. If I can find my flaws before others do, maybe I can fix them in time. That was adaptive then. In a child who needed to maintain connection with their caregivers to survive, it made sense. But you're not that child anymore. The strategy that kept you safe at 7 years old is destroying your peace at 37. The tactics. It uses the inner critic is sophisticated. It doesn't just say you're not good enough, though it does say that constantly. It also uses subtler tactics that are worth learning to recognize. It compares endlessly and selectively. It finds the person in your field who has achieved more, the friend who seems more put together, the stranger on social media whose life appears impossibly perfect, and it holds them up as evidence of your inadequacy. It conveniently forgets your unique strengths, your different circumstances, your own genuine progress. It predicts. With devastating confidence, it tells you exactly how things are going to go wrong. The presentation you're preparing, someone will ask a question you can't answer. The relationship you're starting, they'll eventually see through you. The business you're thinking about launching, the market is too crowded. You're too late. You don't have what it takes. It mind reads. Without a single piece of actual evidence, it tells you what other people are thinking about you. Usually something unflattering. They think you talk too much in that meeting. She probably finds you boring. He's only being kind because he feels sorry for you. These feel like perceptions. They're actually projections. Your own self-doubt being attributed to others. It catastrophizes. One mistake becomes evidence of permanent failure. One bad day becomes proof of a broken life. One rejection becomes confirmation that you are fundamentally unlovable. Creating distance. The first step in dismantling the inner critic's power isn't silencing it, it's seeing it clearly. Start by noticing the voice with deliberate attention. When it launches into its familiar commentary, catch it. Name it. Some people find it helpful to literally give the inner critic a character, a specific voice, a specific image. Maybe it's a disapproving figure from your past. Maybe it's an overly strict teacher. Maybe it's a cartoon character so absurd it can't maintain its authority. This might sound silly, but there's genuine psychological power in it. When you personify the voice and create distance from it, you stop identifying with it. You move from "I'm a failure" to "that part of me is saying I'm a failure." That small grammatical shift creates enormous psychological space, challenging its authority. Once you can see the inner critic clearly, you can start questioning its claims. When it makes a statement, "You'll never be able to do this," treat it like you'd treat any unsubstantiated claim. Ask for evidence. Look at your actual track record. Look at what you've overcome, what you've learned, what you've already done that once seemed impossible. Most of the inner critic statements crumble under direct, honest scrutiny. They're based not on facts, but on fear. Ancient, inherited, recycled fear that has nothing to do with who you actually are or what you're actually capable of. Building the counter voice. Here's what creates lasting change, not just silencing the critic, but actively building a different voice to replace it. This is the compassionate inner witness, the part of you that sees clearly without judgment, that acknowledges difficulty without catastrophizing, that encourages effort without demanding perfection. This voice doesn't arrive fully formed. You build it deliberately, through practice, the same way you build any skill. When the critic attacks, consciously choose a different response. Not a toxic positive override, not "everything is great and I'm perfect," but honest, grounded compassion, the kind you'd offer a good friend. "This is hard. I'm doing my best. I've handled hard things before, and I'll handle this too. I made a mistake. That's human. I can learn from this and keep going. I'm not where I want to be yet, and I'm also not where I was. That matters." The more consistently you practice this, the more natural it becomes. You are literally rewiring your brain, building neural pathways for self-compassion that gradually override the well-worn highways of self-criticism. The goal is transformation, not elimination. Something important. The goal here is not to eliminate your capacity for self-reflection or honest self-assessment. That capacity is valuable. You need to be able to learn from mistakes, to identify areas for growth, to hold yourself accountable. The goal is to transform the quality of your inner voice from a harsh, relentless, fear-driven attacker to a wise, honest, compassionate coach. A good coach sees your weaknesses clearly. They don't pretend they don't exist, but they address them in a way that builds you up rather than tears you down. They believe in your potential even when, especially when, you're struggling to see it yourself. That's who you're learning to be for yourself. And when that shift happens, when the dominant voice in your head becomes genuinely on your side, the amount of energy that frees up is extraordinary. Energy that was being consumed by the constant internal war becomes available for creativity, connection, courage, and joy. Your mind becomes a place you actually want to live in. Chapter 7. Making Peace with Your Emotions. Here's something nobody told you when you were growing up. Your emotions are not your enemy. Not the anger, not the grief, Not the anxiety that wakes you up at 3 a.m. with your heart pounding. Not even the jealousy you feel when someone else gets the thing you wanted. The emotion you're almost too ashamed to admit you're feeling. All of it. Every single uncomfortable, inconvenient, socially unacceptable feeling you've ever tried to push down, explain away, or quietly suffocate. None of it is the problem. The problem is what you were taught to do with it. The training you never asked for. From the time you were very small, you received a steady education in which emotions were acceptable and which ones weren't. This education wasn't usually explicit. It came through reactions, through the look on a parent's face when you cried, through being told to calm down when you were angry, through watching the adults around you pretend everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. Boys learned that vulnerability was weakness, that sadness was something to be conquered rather than felt, that the appropriate response to emotional pain was to push through it, lock it away, and never speak of it again. Girls learned that anger was dangerous, that being too much, too loud, too intense, too opinionated would cost them belonging, that the safest emotional expression was pleasant, accommodating, and small. Everyone, regardless of gender, learned some version of the same fundamental message. Certain parts of your emotional experience are not okay, and the parts that aren't okay need to be managed, hidden, or eliminated. So you became an expert at emotional management, at performing the feeling that was expected rather than experiencing the feeling that was real, at keeping the surface calm while the currents underneath ran fast and dark and completely unexamined. And here's what that cost you: yourself. Because your emotions are not separate from you. They are not inconvenient interruptions to your real life. They are the living, breathing signal system that tells you what matters to you, what violates you, what you need, what you're grieving, what you desire, and what you fear. They are the language of your inner world. When you silence that language, when you disconnect from your emotional experience, you lose access to some of the most important information about who you actually are, what suppression actually does. Here's what happens when emotions don't get expressed. They don't disappear. They relocate. They settle into your body as tension in your jaw, tightness in your chest, chronic pain in your lower back. They surface as behavioral patterns. The perfectionism that's really unprocessed fear. The people-pleasing that's really unprocessed anger. The procrastination that's really unprocessed shame. They emerge in your relationships as overreactions to minor triggers, as walls that won't come down no matter how much you want them to, as a persistent low-grade sense of disconnection, even in moments that should feel close and good. Research confirms this. Chronic emotional suppression is associated with measurably higher rates of physical illness, immune dysfunction, and mental health challenges. Your body keeps score with ruthless precision, and it doesn't care whether you decided your emotions are inconvenient. It stores them anyway, and it finds a way to make you pay attention eventually. This isn't meant to frighten you. It's meant to show you that emotional awareness isn't a luxury for people who have time for it. It's a fundamental act of self-care. It's attending to your own inner weather system with the seriousness and respect it deserves. Learning the language. Most people, when asked what they're feeling, respond with one of four words: happy, sad, mad, or stressed. This limited vocabulary isn't just linguistically imprecise, it actually limits your ability to understand and work with your emotional experience. There's an enormous difference between feeling disappointed and feeling betrayed, between feeling anxious and feeling ashamed, between feeling frustrated and feeling genuinely angry. Each of those emotional states carries different information, calls for a different response, and needs something different from you. Expanding your emotional vocabulary is one of the simplest and most underrated tools for self-understanding. When you can identify precisely what you're feeling, not just bad, but specifically hurt, or specifically embarrassed, or specifically grieving, you unlock the ability to respond to yourself with much greater precision and care. Start paying attention to where emotions live in your body before you even try to name them. Emotion is experienced physically before it's processed mentally. Anxiety feels different in your body than excitement does, even though they involve similar physiological arousal. Anger feels different than grief. Shame feels different than disappointment. Your body knows what you're feeling before your mind has labeled it. Check in with yourself regularly, not in a clinical, detached way, but with genuine curiosity. What's actually happening in me right now? What am I feeling? And where am I feeling it? What might this emotion be trying to tell me? The practice of being with one of the most transformative emotional skills you can develop, and one of the most countercultural, is the ability to simply be with a difficult emotion without immediately trying to fix, escape, or override it. Our entire culture is organized around the avoidance of discomfort. We have an app for distraction, a substance for numbing, a scroll for dissociation. The moment an uncomfortable feeling arises, the instinct is to make it stop, quickly, efficiently, by any available means. But here's what actually happens when you do that. The emotion doesn't process. It doesn't complete its natural arc. It gets interrupted mid-cycle and stored, unresolved, unintegrated, waiting for the next opportunity to surface, usually at a moment even less convenient than this one. Emotions, when allowed to move through you fully, have a natural life cycle. They arise, they peak, and they subside. This is true even for very intense emotions. The wave always breaks eventually. What prolongs emotional pain is not the feeling itself. It's the resistance to the feeling. When you can sit with an uncomfortable emotion, not dramatize it, not analyze it obsessively, but simply acknowledge it and let it be present, you give it permission to complete its natural cycle. And in doing so, you develop something invaluable, the lived knowledge that you can feel anything and survive it. That emotional intensity is not dangerous, that you are larger than any single feeling that moves through you. This is the foundation of genuine emotional resilience, not toughness, not suppression, not performing okayness you don't feel. Real resilience, the kind that comes from knowing in your body and your bones that you can handle your own inner experience. Emotion as information. Once you stop fearing your emotions and start listening to them, something remarkable happens. They become genuinely useful. Anger, for example, is not a character flaw. It's a signal. It tells you that something you value is being threatened or violated. It's your psyche drawing a line, saying this matters, this is not okay. Something needs to change here. When you learn to hear the message rather than immediately either suppressing the emotion or expressing it destructively, anger becomes one of your most important guides. Sadness is not weakness. It's the emotion of loss. And loss is a real part of life. When you allow yourself to grieve what deserves to be grieved, you move through it. When you don't, it accumulates. The people who seem emotionally stuck, who carry an ancient heaviness even on good days, often they are people who were never given permission to fully grieve something they lost. Fear is not a stop sign. It's information about where your edges are, about what matters enough to feel threatening. Not all fear deserves to be acted on, but all fear deserves to be heard. When you can acknowledge your fear without being controlled by it, you can make decisions from wisdom rather than avoidance. Even shame, the most painful of all emotions, carries a message when you can look at it without flinching. Shame says, you care about belonging, about integrity, about being a good person. The pain of shame is not evidence of your unworthiness. It's evidence of your values. The work is learning to extract that information without letting shame become the totalizing story of who you are. Emotional self-soothing. One of the most important skills in your self-love toolkit is the ability to comfort yourself during emotional distress without external help, without substances, without distraction. This is emotional self-soothing. And for many people, it's a skill they never learned because no one ever modeled it for them. They were either given external soothing, food, television, busyness, or they were told to get over it. Neither approach taught them how to be a compassionate, steady presence for themselves in the middle of emotional pain. Building this skill, start small. The next time you feel emotionally activated, anxious, hurt, angry, overwhelmed, try this. Pause. Take 3 slow, deliberate breaths, making the exhale longer than the inhale. This single physiological action directly activates your parasympathetic nervous system and begins to down-regulate your stress response. Then, with your hand on your chest or your arms wrapped around yourself, speak to yourself the way you would speak to someone you love who is hurting. Acknowledge what's real. Offer warmth. Remind yourself that this is hard and that hard doesn't mean wrong, and that feelings pass and that you are going to be okay. This is not naivety. This is not toxic positivity. This is learning to be the steady, caring presence in your own life that you spent years hoping someone else would be. As you develop emotional mastery, as you learn to witness your feelings clearly, accept them without judgment, work with their information, and soothe yourself through the difficult ones, your relationship with yourself deepens in ways that nothing else can replicate. You become genuinely intimate with your own inner world. And that intimacy is the bedrock of authentic self-love. Chapter 8. How Self-Love Transforms Every Relationship You Have. You've probably heard the phrase, you can't pour from an empty cup. It's become something of a cliché, but it points at something real that most people haven't fully reckoned with. The quality of every relationship in your life is a direct reflection of the quality of your relationship with yourself, not because of some vague spiritual law, because of very concrete, very observable psychological dynamics that play out in your interactions every single day. The template effect. Your relationship with yourself functions as a template for every other relationship you enter. The way you speak to yourself is the way you unconsciously allow others to speak to you. The standards you hold for yourself are the standards you model for others to meet, or fail to meet. The boundaries you set, or don't set, with yourself establish the baseline for what you'll tolerate from everyone else. If you're chronically harsh and unforgiving with yourself, you'll be surprisingly comfortable, even if it's painful. In relationships where others are harsh and unforgiving with you, it matches the template. It feels like home, even if home was never safe. If you consistently abandon your own needs to manage others' feelings, you'll attract relationships where your needs continue to be overlooked because you've demonstrated through your own behavior that your needs are negotiable. If you don't trust your own judgment, you'll seek partners in friendships with people who tell you what to think and call that dynamic love. This is not your fault. These patterns were built in childhood, reinforced throughout your life, and they operate largely below the level of conscious awareness. But once you see them clearly, you have a choice. You can begin to build a different template, from neediness to wholeness. The most fundamental shift that self-love creates in your relationships is the shift from entering them with a deficit to entering them with abundance. When you don't love yourself, you come to relationships hungry. You're looking for someone to provide the validation, acceptance, and love that you can't generate internally. And this hunger, however understandable, distorts everything. It makes you cling. It makes you people please. It makes you tolerate treatment that doesn't honor you because any connection feels better than the emptiness of being without it. It makes you lose yourself in relationships, suppressing your own preferences, abandoning your own needs, becoming a mirror for whoever you're with rather than a distinct person in your own right. And it makes genuine intimacy impossible because true intimacy requires two whole people who can be vulnerable without being consumed, who can be close without losing themselves, who can love without needing the relationship to save them. When you love yourself, you bring something entirely different to the table. You bring fullness. You bring curiosity rather than need. You bring the ability to choose someone freely rather than clutch at them desperately. And that energy, the energy of someone who is genuinely, comfortably whole, is magnetic in a way that need never is. The boundary question. Nothing changes in your relationships more dramatically when you love yourself than your relationship with boundaries. Boundaries are perhaps the most misunderstood concept in personal development. People hear the word and think of walls, of coldness, of rejection. But boundaries are not about keeping people out. They are about defining the conditions under which genuine connection can actually happen. Without boundaries, what looks like closeness is often just enmeshment. Two people so entangled with each other's emotions and needs that neither one can actually see the other clearly. Enmeshment feels like love. It is often mistaken for love. But it is not love. It is codependency wearing love's clothing. Healthy boundaries say, this is where I end and you begin. These are my needs, my limits, my non-negotiables. Within those lines, I am completely available to you. But I will not cross them, not to keep you, not to avoid conflict, not because I'm afraid of your disapproval. Setting boundaries from a place of self-love is fundamentally different from setting them from a place of fear or anger. It's not a power move. It's not a punishment. It's a clear, calm communication of what you need in order to show up fully in this relationship. And here's what most people discover when they finally start doing this. The relationships that matter survive it. Often, they deepen because the people who genuinely care about you respond to honest communication with respect. And the people who respond to your boundaries with anger, withdrawal, or manipulation, That response tells you everything you need to know about whether that relationship was ever actually about you. Conflict as connection. When you don't love yourself, conflict in relationships feels existential. A disagreement becomes a threat to the entire relationship. Criticism feels like rejection. Difference of opinion feels like incompatibility. Your nervous system responds to relational friction the same way it responds to genuine danger. Because when your worth is dependent on the relationship, any threat to the relationship is a threat to your worth. This is why so many people either avoid conflict entirely, saying yes when they mean no, swallowing their truth to keep the peace, or escalate it into something far larger than the original issue warranted. Neither response comes from choice. Both come from a nervous system that is genuinely convinced that conflict equals catastrophe. When you love yourself, when your worth is no longer entirely staked on this relationship, this person's approval, this dynamic remaining intact, conflict becomes something else entirely. It becomes information. It becomes an opportunity to understand each other more deeply, to solve a problem together, to navigate difference with honesty and respect. You can hear feedback without feeling destroyed by it. You can disagree without needing the other person to concede. You can say, "I'm angry about this," without the anger being an emergency, and you can hear, "I'm hurt by that," without collapsing into shame. Conflict handled well, with self-awareness, honesty, and genuine care for both people, is not the enemy of intimacy. It is one of the pathways to it. Choosing from strength. Perhaps the most powerful relational gift of self-love is this. When you love yourself, you become genuinely capable of choosing your relationships rather than just accepting what's available. When you're running on a deficit of self-worth, your choices are constrained. Any relationship that offers the feeling of being wanted, needed, or temporarily less alone can look attractive. Even when on a deeper level, you can feel that it isn't right. The hunger overrides the wisdom. When you love yourself, the hunger subsides enough for you to actually see clearly. You can ask, does this person's character align with my values? Does this relationship bring out the better or the worst parts of me? Do I feel more or less like myself around this person? Am I choosing this because I genuinely want it or because I'm afraid of the alternative? These are the questions that lead to genuinely good relational choices. And they're only available to you when you're not desperate for the answer to be yes. Self-love doesn't make you closed off to love. It makes you available to the real thing because you're no longer willing to settle for a substitute. Chapter 9. The Self-Love Success Formula. Let's dismantle a myth that might be costing you everything. The myth goes like this. First, I need to achieve something significant. Then, I'll feel worthy. And once I feel worthy, I'll be able to love myself. It sounds logical. It might even sound humble, like you're not willing to celebrate yourself until you've actually earned it. But it is one of the most quietly destructive beliefs you can carry. And it almost never gets examined because it fits so neatly into the cultural story about how success and worth are supposed to work. Here's the truth, backed by decades of psychological research and the lived experience of virtually everyone who has done this work seriously. The sequence is backwards. Self-love is not the reward for success. Self-love is the foundation from which genuine, sustainable success actually grows. Why achievement can't give you worth. When your motivation for achievement is to finally feel worthy, you've created a race that cannot be won, because every time you reach a goal, and this is the part nobody warns you about, your brain doesn't say, "You've done enough. You're worthy now. You can rest." It says, "Good. Now what's next?" And the next milestone gets placed just far enough ahead that it maintains the same emotional distance from satisfaction as the last one. You get the promotion. You think this will be it. But then you realize the next level up exists. And suddenly, the promotion feels like exactly where you already were, just with more responsibility and the same underlying emptiness. You achieve the relationship status you were told would make you whole. And then you discover that the anxiety and self-doubt you carried into the relationship came with you. No external circumstance can outrun an internal wound. This is not pessimism. This is just how human psychology works. External achievement can provide genuine satisfaction, but it cannot provide self-worth. Those are different things, and confusing them is the source of enormous, unnecessary suffering. What self-love actually does to your performance, when you approach your work, your goals, and your ambitions from a foundation of self-love, something shifts that changes everything. You stop performing and start creating. Performance is driven by fear, fear of judgment, fear of failure, fear of being exposed as less than you've claimed to be. It's exhausting, it's constricting, and it produces work that is technically competent but rarely genuinely inspired. Because genuine inspiration requires the willingness to take real risks, to try things that might fail spectacularly, to bring something authentically yours into the world. And that willingness only comes when your worth isn't on the line with every attempt. Creation is driven by genuine interest, by authentic desire, by the intrinsic satisfaction of expressing something that matters to you. And it produces work that resonates not because it was calculated to resonate, but because it came from somewhere real. People who operate from self-love make decisions differently. Instead of asking, "What will make me look good?" they ask, "What actually matters to me?" Instead of choosing paths based on their prestige or their approval-generating potential, they choose based on genuine alignment with their values, their curiosity, their actual strengths. These choices are often less conventional. They sometimes look less impressive from the outside, at least initially. But they produce a quality of engagement and persistence that approval-driven choices rarely sustain. Because when the work itself is meaningful to you, you don't need constant external reinforcement to keep going. The self-sabotage problem. If you've ever watched yourself inexplicably destroy something good, a relationship that was going beautifully, an opportunity that was opening up, a project that was finally gaining momentum, just as it was starting to really work, you've encountered self-sabotage. Self-sabotage is not irrational. It is completely logical. From the perspective of your subconscious beliefs about what you deserve. If somewhere deep down you carry the belief that you are not worthy of success, of love, of genuine happiness, then your subconscious mind will work to align your external reality with that internal belief, not out of malice, out of the brain's drive for internal consistency. It is genuinely trying to protect you from the cognitive dissonance of having an experience that contradicts your deepest beliefs about yourself. The antidote is not more discipline or more strategy. The antidote is addressing the root belief. When you genuinely love yourself, when you genuinely believe in the cells of your body that you are worthy of good things, self-sabotage loses its engine. Your subconscious stops working against you and starts working with you. Your actions align naturally with your goals because your subconscious is no longer trying to maintain a story of unworthiness. Resilience as a competitive advantage. In any field, in any endeavor, the people who ultimately succeed are rarely the most talented. They are the most resilient, the ones who can take a serious hit, a public failure, a devastating rejection, a period of zero progress, and get back up. Not because they feel nothing, but because their sense of self is not annihilated by the setback. Self-love is the engine of resilience. When your worth is internally sourced, failure changes its character entirely. It becomes information rather than verdict. It becomes data about what to adjust rather than evidence of who you are. You can look at a failure honestly, genuinely honestly, without minimizing or deflecting, extract everything useful from it, and move forward without carrying the weight of it as a life sentence. This is not toxic positivity. It's not pretending failure doesn't hurt or doesn't matter. It does hurt. It does matter. But there is an enormous difference between this failed and I am a failure. The first is a fact about a specific situation. The second is an identity claim, and it's one that self-love refuses to accept. Success that actually satisfies. Here's what changes most profoundly when success is built on a foundation of self-love. It actually feels good. This sounds obvious. Of course, success feels good. That's the whole point. But talk to almost anyone who has chased achievement as a path to self-worth, and they'll tell you the same thing. Getting there never quite felt the way they thought it would. The satisfaction was real, but brief. The bar immediately moved. The emptiness came back. When success is an expression of who you are rather than a proof of it. When you pursue goals because they genuinely matter to you rather than because achieving them will finally make you acceptable. The satisfaction is deeper, more lasting, and more nourishing. You can enjoy your wins without immediately discounting them. You can feel genuinely proud of your growth without the pride being immediately undercut by the next standard you haven't reached yet. You can celebrate, really celebrate, because your accomplishments belong to you, not to the story of finally being enough. This is what the self-love success formula ultimately creates. Not just more achievement, but achievement that is genuinely fulfilling. A life that looks successful from the outside and feels successful from the inside. That alignment between your external reality and your internal experience is what most people are actually searching for when they chase the next goal. And it starts not with the goal, but with you. Chapter 10. Loving Yourself. When life falls apart. Here's the test nobody warned you about. You've been doing the work. You've been practicing self-compassion. You've been setting boundaries, building the inner voice, making choices that honor who you are. Things have been getting better, genuinely, measurably better. You can feel it. And then life happens. The job falls through. The relationship ends. The health scare arrives. The thing you worked toward for years collapses in a single phone call, a single conversation, a single moment you didn't see coming. And in that moment, every practice you've built, every neural pathway you've been carefully strengthening, it feels like it vanishes. The old voice comes back louder than ever. The old patterns surge up from somewhere deep. And you find yourself wondering whether any of this work was real or whether you were just fooling yourself during the easy parts. This is not failure. This is the real test. And it's the one that matters most. Why hard times reveal everything. Think of self-love like a structure you're building. During calm weather, it's relatively easy to assess its quality. Things look stable, nothing is being pressed too hard, the weak points aren't obvious. But a storm doesn't damage a strong structure, it only reveals the damage that was already there. Life's hard moments are not interruptions to your self-love journey, they are the curriculum of it. Because this is where the real question gets asked. Can you be on your own side when being on your own side is genuinely difficult? Not when everything is going well and self-compassion feels almost easy. Not when you're winning, when you're loved, when the evidence of your worth is readily available in your external circumstances. But when you've failed, when you've lost, when you're scared, when you look at your life and the gap between where you are and where you wanted to be feels vast and humiliating, can you love yourself then? That is where genuine self-love lives, not in the highlight moments, in the hard ones. The trap of conditional self-love. Most people, without realizing it, practice conditional self-love. They are kind to themselves when they're performing well. They offer themselves grace when they feel they've earned it. They approve of themselves when the evidence supports approval. But the moment they fail, the moment they make a significant mistake, lose something important, or find themselves far from where they think they should be, the self-compassion disappears completely, replaced by exactly the kind of harsh, relentless self-criticism that makes recovery slower, more painful, and more difficult. This is the cruelest irony of conditional self-love. You withdraw your own care exactly when you need it most. It would be like a good doctor who only showed up when their patients were healthy. Genuine self-love is unconditional, not because you're pretending everything is fine when it isn't, not because you're making excuses for genuine mistakes or real failures, but because your fundamental worth as a human being is not a variable. It does not go up when you succeed and down when you fail. It is not negotiable. It is not earned. It simply is. The practice, especially during hard times, is returning to that truth again and again, even when the circumstances are screaming a different story. What the hard moments actually trigger. Here's something worth understanding about why life's storms are so destabilizing. They don't just create new pain. They reactivate old pain. A job loss doesn't just create practical and financial stress. For someone who learned in childhood that their worth depended on their productivity, a job loss can trigger a depth of shame that seems wildly disproportionate to the event itself. Because it's not just about the job. It's about every moment they were made to feel that their value was contingent on their output. A relationship ending doesn't just create grief. For someone who carries abandonment wounds from early in their life, it can activate a terror that feels almost primal, the terror of a child who didn't know if they were going to be okay. Understanding this dynamic is enormously compassionate toward yourself. When you find yourself responding to a setback with an intensity that seems larger than the situation warrants, that's usually a sign that the situation has touched something old and deep. Something that deserves not just practical problem solving, but genuine emotional care. The appropriate response to that recognition is not to dismiss the intensity. It's to bring even more compassion to it. Of course, this is hitting hard. Of course, this is stirring something deep. This is hard. You're human. Let's take care of you right now. The practice of staying with yourself. During difficult periods, the most powerful act of self-love is the simplest and most overlooked one: staying with yourself. Not abandoning yourself to distraction. Not drowning the difficulty in busyness. Not bypassing the pain with forced positivity or relentless reframing. But actually, staying present to your own experience with honesty, with kindness, with the same quality of attention you would offer to someone you love who is going through something genuinely hard. This looks like checking in with yourself several times a day during difficult periods. How am I actually doing? What do I actually need right now? Not what should I be doing to fix this, but what does this version of me, the one who is hurting, genuinely need in this moment? Sometimes the answer is practical. Sometimes you need to make a phone call, have a conversation, take a concrete next step. But often, the first answer is softer. You need to rest, to cry without apologizing for it, to sit quietly with what's true without immediately trying to change it, to be gentle with yourself in a way that doesn't come naturally but is exactly what the moment requires. Staying with yourself also means resisting the urge to make the pain mean more than it does. When you're in the middle of a hard period, your mind will offer you stories that turn a setback into a permanent verdict, that turn a loss into evidence of your fundamental unworthiness, that turn a difficult season into a prediction about how the rest of your life will go. These stories feel true. They feel like clear-eyed assessments of reality, but they're almost never accurate. They're fear-talking. They're old patterns activated by present pain. When you notice those stories arising, you don't have to fight them. You don't have to argue with them or prove them wrong. You can simply notice them. My mind is telling me this failure means I'll never succeed. And gently, without drama, choose not to believe them as final truth. That's a quiet, radical act of self-love. Self-forgiveness as a practice. Hard times often involve mistakes, sometimes significant ones. And one of the most important expressions of self-love during storms is the practice of genuine self-forgiveness. Not quick, dismissive self-forgiveness that rushes past accountability to reach comfort, but the real thing, the kind that requires you to honestly acknowledge what happened, take responsibility for your part without inflating it beyond what's true, genuinely learn from it, and then make the deliberate choice to release it. Self-forgiveness is not saying what happened was okay. It's saying, I am a human being who made a mistake or a series of mistakes in circumstances that were difficult and with the level of awareness and tools I had at the time. I am going to take responsibility for my part. I am going to learn everything I can from this, and then I am going to lay down the burden of shame, because carrying it indefinitely serves no one, least of all me. The hardest part of self-forgiveness is that it can feel like letting yourself off the hook, like you're not taking things seriously enough. But consider this: shame does not improve behavior. Research consistently shows that chronic shame, the kind that comes from relentlessly punishing yourself for past mistakes, actually increases the likelihood of repeating the same behaviors, because shame depletes the psychological resources needed for genuine change. Compassionate accountability, honestly acknowledging what happened, understanding why, committing to doing differently, is what actually creates growth. Self-forgiveness is not the enemy of accountability. It's the foundation of it. Asking for help is self-love. One more thing about loving yourself through hard times, and it's important. Sometimes the most powerful act of self-care is reaching out for support. For people who have learned to be self-sufficient as a survival strategy, who learned early that needing things was dangerous or burdensome or evidence of weakness, asking for help can feel almost impossible, like an admission of failure, like a vulnerability too far. But seeking support when you genuinely need it is not weakness. It is wisdom. It is the honest recognition that humans are not built to carry everything alone, and that allowing others to show up for you in appropriate ways is not a deficit. It is how we are designed to function. This includes professional support, therapy, counseling, coaching. These are not last resorts for people who have broken down completely. They are tools, highly effective tools, for people who are committed to their own growth and well-being. Investing in your mental and emotional health during difficult periods is one of the most concrete expressions of genuine self-love that exists. The storms will come. They all would do. But the person who has built a genuine foundation of self-love navigates them differently, not without pain. The pain is real and it's honored, but with a steadiness, a self-compassion, and a fundamental trust in their own resilience that makes the difference between being broken by difficulty and being built by it. Chapter 11. Advanced Practices for Unshakable Confidence. You've built the foundation. Now let's go deeper. The practices in this chapter are for people who have moved beyond the basics, who have begun to develop genuine self-awareness, who are practicing self-compassion with some consistency, who are doing the work. These are the practices that take you from building self-love to embodying it, from something you do to something you are. Shadow work, loving the parts you've hidden. Here's something that almost nobody talks about in the self-love conversation, but that might be the most important piece of all. You cannot fully love yourself while rejecting parts of yourself. And most people are rejecting significant parts of themselves, not consciously, not deliberately, but thoroughly. The parts they learned were unacceptable, the parts that drew criticism or withdrawal or disgust from the people they needed most, the parts they buried so effectively that they've almost forgotten they exist. Carl Jung called this the shadow, not because it's evil, but because it lives in the darkness of your unconscious, hidden from the light of your awareness. Your shadow contains the aspects of your personality that you've rejected or denied. And importantly, it also contains real gifts that got buried along with the parts you were told were wrong. The anger that was called dangerous might also contain your power. The sensitivity that was called weakness might also contain your depth and your capacity for connection. The ambition that was called selfish might also contain your genuine drive to contribute something meaningful. The neediness that was called pathetic might also contain your beautiful human capacity for intimacy. Shadow work is the practice of bringing these hidden parts back into consciousness, not to indulge them without boundaries, but to understand them, integrate them, and find healthy ways to express the gifts they contain. A simple starting point. Pay attention to what triggers you most intensely in other people. The qualities that provoke your strongest negative reactions, jealousy, irritation, contempt, often mirror something in yourself that you've disowned. Not always, but often enough that the question is worth sitting with. When you find yourself strongly judging someone for being too loud, too needy, too ambitious, too sensitive, ask yourself honestly, is there a part of me that longs to be allowed to be this? Is there something here that I've suppressed so thoroughly that seeing it in someone else feels threatening? This isn't about becoming a different person. It's about becoming a more complete one. The practice of internal reparenting. If the love and validation you needed in childhood wasn't reliably available, and for most people it wasn't, at least not consistently, there's a gap in your psychological foundation, a place where secure attachment should have been, but wasn't. The work of internal reparenting is about filling that gap, not by finding someone else to fill it for you, but by learning to provide for yourself what you most needed then. This sounds abstract. Here's what it looks like in practice. When you're scared, instead of either dismissing the fear or being overwhelmed by it, you speak to yourself the way a genuinely good parent would speak to a frightened child. I know this is scary. I'm here. We're going to figure this out together. You're not alone. When you made a mistake, instead of attacking yourself mercilessly, you respond the way a loving parent responds to a child who has fallen. You made a mistake? That's okay. What can we learn? How do we do better next time? I'm still proud of you. When you accomplish something, instead of immediately minimizing it or moving on to the next standard, you pause and genuinely celebrate it the way a warm, attentive parent celebrates their child's growth. Look at what you did. That took courage. That took effort. I see it, and I'm proud of you. At first this feels strange, even embarrassing, but the part of you that needed this, that still needs this, is very real, and it responds. Over time, as you consistently provide this quality of care to yourself, the psychological wound of unmet early needs begins slowly and genuinely to heal. Visualization and mental rehearsal. Your brain is a remarkable pattern recognition and pattern completion system, and one of its most powerful and underused features is this. It responds to vividly imagined experience almost identically to real experience. This is not wishful thinking. Neuroimaging studies consistently show that imagining an experience activates many of the same neural pathways as actually having that experience, which means you can use deliberate visualization to literally program your nervous system for confidence, groundedness, and self-assurance. Here's how to make this work. Set aside 5 to 10 minutes daily. Morning works particularly well before the noise of the day begins. Close your eyes. Breathe slowly until you feel relatively settled. Then begin to build a mental picture of yourself, not a fantasy version, but a genuinely possible version, showing up exactly as you want to show up. Make it specific and sensory. See yourself walking into a difficult conversation with your feet solid on the ground, your breath steady, your voice calm and clear. Feel the physical sensation of being genuinely comfortable in your own skin. Hear yourself speaking with honesty and care. Notice the quality of presence you have, the attention you can give to the other person because you're not consumed by anxious self-monitoring. The more real and detailed you make these mental rehearsals, the more your brain incorporates them as genuine experience. Your nervous system builds the pattern. Your default begins to shift. The person in the visualization stops being aspirational and starts being recognizable. Celebrating yourself. Seriously, this one is simple, wildly underrated, and genuinely transformative if you actually do it. Most people are extraordinarily efficient at cataloging their failures and nearly incapable of genuinely acknowledging their wins. Not just the big ones, the promotions, the milestones, the obvious victories, but the everyday ones. The courage it took to have that hard conversation. The consistency with which you've been showing up for your health. The kindness you extended to someone who was struggling. The way you handled something that would have broken you a year ago. Start keeping what you might think of as a daily evidence log. A small, consistent practice of writing down 3 things you did well today. They don't have to be impressive. They have to be real. The purpose of this practice is not delusion. It's calibration. Most people's internal accounting system is deeply skewed. It records failures with high definition and nearly deletes successes. The evidence log is a corrective measure. It teaches your brain to notice and retain positive data about yourself with the same reliability it currently reserves for negative data. Over time, this practice literally changes your self-concept. Not through repetition of affirmations you don't quite believe, through accumulated real evidence of who you actually are. Embodiment, bringing self-love into your body. Here's something that often gets missed in conversations about self-love. It has to live in your body, not just your mind. You can understand every concept in this entire program intellectually and still walk around with hunched shoulders, a tight chest, a voice that trails off when you speak, and a physical presence that broadcasts something quite different from self-love. Because your body has its own memory, its own patterns, its own deeply grooved ways of holding the stories you've been living. Real self-love is embodied. It's in how you hold yourself, how you breathe, how you take up space, how you make contact with your own physical experience. Pay attention to your posture right now. Are your shoulders pulled forward? Is your chest slightly collapsed? Is your breath shallow and high in your chest? These are physical patterns of protection, the body's way of making itself smaller, less visible, less exposed. Try this. Roll your shoulders back and down. Let your chest open slightly. Take a breath that moves all the way into your belly. Feel your feet on the floor. Take up the space your body actually occupies. Notice what happens internally when you do this. For most people, the physical shift creates an almost immediate internal shift. Confidence is not just a mental state, it's a somatic one. Your body doesn't just reflect how you feel, it influences how you feel. When you hold yourself like someone who respects and values themselves, your brain begins to generate the internal experience to match. Somatic practices, yoga, dance, bodywork, breathwork, deliberate movement, are not supplementary to self-love work. For many people, they are the most direct path to it, because the body is where the oldest patterns live, and it's where the deepest healing happens. Chapter 12. Self-love in love, staying whole. While being together, romantic relationships are where self-love gets its hardest work out, because the desire to be loved deeply, consistently, unconditionally loved by another person is one of the most powerful forces in human psychology. It is completely natural. It is not a weakness. It is not something to be transcended or eliminated. It is a genuine human need. But when that need is met with an absence of self-love, it becomes something else. It becomes desperation. And desperation, in the context of romance, leads to choices that cost you yourself. Coming to the table whole, the most important thing you can bring to any romantic relationship is a complete person, not someone with no wounds. That person doesn't exist. Not someone who has resolved every issue and arrived at a state of perfect self-possession, but someone who has a genuine relationship with themselves. Someone who knows what they value, what they need, what they're willing to accept, and what they're not. Someone who can be vulnerable without being consumed. Someone whose sense of self does not require the relationship to survive. This changes the entire energy of how you enter romantic connection. When you're whole, you stop looking at potential partners as solutions to the problem of your own incompleteness. You stop unconsciously scanning for someone who will fix the parts of yourself you can't accept. You stop being drawn primarily to people who match the familiar template. The one laid down in childhood, the one that feels like home even when home wasn't safe. Instead, you become genuinely curious about the actual person in front of you. You can see them clearly, their actual character, their actual values, their actual capacity for the kind of relationship you want, rather than seeing them through the distorting lens of your own need. This clarity is not coldness. It's the precondition for real intimacy, because real intimacy requires seeing and being seen accurately, and that's only possible when you're not desperate for a particular answer. Authenticity from the start. One of the most self-defeating patterns in dating is the pattern of self-erasure, the progressive disappearance of your authentic self in service of being liked. It starts subtly. You notice that they seem to like a particular kind of humor, so you lean into that. You notice they hold a certain opinion strongly, so you soften or suppress your different view. You notice they seem to need a certain kind of partner, so you begin, almost unconsciously, shaping yourself toward that image. By the time you've been dating for a few months, the person they're falling for might bear only a partial resemblance to who you actually are, and you've set up a dynamic that requires you to maintain a performance indefinitely, or to eventually reveal yourself and risk the loss of something you've invested significantly in building. Self-love in dating means showing up as yourself from the beginning, even the parts that are unconventional, even the opinions that might be polarizing, even the needs that might feel like too much. Not because authenticity guarantees attraction. It doesn't. Some people will not be drawn to the real you. But here's what that actually means. Those people are not the right people, and finding out quickly, before months of emotional investment and self-suppression, is a gift, even when it doesn't feel like one. The people who are genuinely right for you will be drawn to who you actually are, and you can only meet them if you're actually present. Maintaining your center in closeness. One of the most challenging aspects of romantic love is maintaining your individual sense of self as the relationship deepens, because genuine intimacy creates genuine merging, a beautiful dissolution of boundaries in moments of real connection. And that can slide, if you're not paying attention, into a loss of self that ultimately damages both people. You stop doing the things that made you feel alive before the relationship. Your friendships gradually thin out because your partner has become your entire social world. Your goals and interests slowly reorganize themselves around the relationship rather than existing alongside it. You start defining yourself primarily in relational terms, in terms of who you are to this person, rather than in terms of who you are. Self-love in an ongoing relationship means protecting your individual aliveness, keeping up with the friendships, the interests, the pursuits, the parts of you that exist entirely independently of this partnership, not as a rejection of closeness, but as a commitment to bringing your full self to the closeness rather than a diminished one. A person who maintains their own center, who continues to grow, to have a rich inner life, to be genuinely interested in things beyond the relationship, is far more interesting, attractive, and nourishing as a partner than one who has dissolved themselves completely into the dynamic. Maintaining your center isn't selfish, it's generosity. Because when you stay whole, there is so much more of you to actually share. The hardest expression of self-love. And then there's this, the one that takes the most courage, and that is perhaps the purest expression of self-love that exists in the context of romance, ending a relationship that isn't working. Not at the first sign of difficulty. Every meaningful relationship goes through genuinely hard periods. And working through those periods with commitment and honesty is one of the most valuable things you can do. Difficulty is not incompatibility, but there is a difference between difficulty and fundamental misalignment, between growing pains and consistent, chronic diminishment, between a relationship going through a hard season and a relationship that, at its core, requires you to be less than you are in order to maintain it. When you love yourself, when your worth is genuinely not dependent on this relationship surviving, you can see this difference clearly, and you can act on what you see, even when acting on it is painful, even when the familiarity of what you're leaving feels safer than the uncertainty of what comes next. Choosing your own integrity, your own growth, your own well-being over the comfort of a relationship that isn't genuinely serving you, that is not giving up. That is not failure. That is one of the most profound acts of self-respect available to you. And it creates space for something that actually fits. Space for the real thing. Chapter 13. The courage to be exactly who you are. There is a version of you that you've been keeping quiet, not because it doesn't exist, not because it isn't real, but because somewhere along the way you learned that the full, unfiltered, genuinely alive version of you was too much, or not enough, or simply too risky to put into the world without significant editing first. So you learned to edit. You learned to calibrate. You learned which parts of yourself played well in which rooms and which parts needed to stay hidden. You became, over time, extraordinarily skilled at presenting the version of yourself most likely to be accepted. And quietly, persistently, at enormous cost, you set aside the version that was actually true. This is what living inauthentically costs you. Not just peace of mind, not just self-respect, but the actual texture of your life, the depth of your relationships, the meaning of your work, the quality of your connection to your own experience, because you cannot be fully alive in a life built around a curated version of yourself. You can be comfortable, you can be approved of, you can be successful by certain measures, but fully alive, that requires the full you. The persona and the person. The psychologist Carl Jung described what he called the persona, the social mask that every human constructs to navigate the expectations of the world around them. The persona is not entirely false. It contains real aspects of your personality. but it is selective. It presents the parts of you that are safe, acceptable, and socially functional. And it conceals the parts that feel risky or complicated. The persona serves a purpose. Navigating social reality requires some degree of adaptation. You don't behave identically in a job interview and in your closest friendship. And that's not hypocrisy. It's contextual intelligence. The problem comes when the persona becomes your primary identity, when the mask becomes more familiar than the face beneath it, when you spend so much time and energy managing how you appear that you lose touch with who you actually are. And the signal that this has happened is usually not dramatic. It's subtle. It's a persistent low-grade sense that something is slightly off, that you're going through the motions of a life that looks right but doesn't quite feel like yours, that the accomplishments feel hollow, the relationships feel slightly surface level, the successes feel disconnected from any genuine sense of fulfillment. That's the cost of chronic inauthenticity, not a crisis, just a quiet, ongoing distance from yourself. What authenticity actually requires, living authentically, doesn't mean saying everything you think to everyone you encounter. It doesn't mean abandoning discretion or performing your inner life as public theater. Authenticity is not the same as oversharing. What it requires is something subtler and more fundamental: alignment. The experience of your inner reality and your outer expression being genuinely connected, of making choices that reflect what you actually value rather than what you think you should value, of entering relationships as yourself rather than as the version of yourself you've calculated will be most well received. It requires honesty about what you actually want, not what you've been told to want, not what looks good, not what would impress the people whose opinions you've been carrying around like extra weight, but what genuinely matters to you when you set all of that aside and listen carefully to your own center. Sometimes that honesty is inconvenient. It might reveal that the career path you've invested years in doesn't actually excite you, that the relationship you're in doesn't actually fit who you've become, that the lifestyle you've constructed looks successful from the outside but feels like a costume rather than a life. These are not comfortable discoveries, but they are honest ones. And honesty with yourself, above all, is the foundation of everything genuine. The fear of being rejected for being real. The deepest fear underneath inauthenticity is almost always the same. If people knew who I really was, they wouldn't love me. This fear is so common, it's practically universal, and it makes complete sense given how most people were formed. If the love you received in childhood was conditional, if approval came and went based on whether you were performing correctly, then your nervous system learned a very clear lesson. The real me is too risky. The edited version is safer. But here's what that lesson has been costing you ever since. The love you receive for the edited version isn't actually satisfying your real hunger, because the love isn't reaching you. It's landing on the mask, not on the face. You can accumulate enormous amounts of approval, admiration, and positive attention, and still feel fundamentally unseen. Still feel in your quietest moments that if people really knew you, the whole thing would collapse. The only exit from this particular loneliness is the one that terrifies you. Being genuinely yourself and seeing what happens, not recklessly, not all at once, but progressively, deliberately, in environments and relationships where there is enough safety to try, expressing an honest opinion, sharing a genuine feeling, revealing an interest or a value that feels vulnerable, letting someone see the parts of you that aren't polished, and discovering, as most people who do this work eventually discover, that the real you is not only survivable, but that the connection it creates is richer, warmer, and more genuinely nourishing than anything the edited version ever generated. Your difference is not your problem. One more thing about authenticity that deserves to be said clearly. The ways in which you're different from the mainstream, the unconventional interests, the unusual perspectives, the quirks and intensities and edges that don't fit neatly into any category, these are not problems to be managed. They are the most interesting and valuable things about you. The qualities that made you feel like too much or not enough in environments that couldn't hold them are often precisely the qualities that make you irreplaceable in the environments that can. Your intensity is someone's favorite thing about you. Your sensitivity is someone's safe harbor. Your unconventional thinking is the solution to someone's unsolvable problem. Radical self-acceptance means accepting not just your flaws, but your distinctiveness. Not just tolerating the ways you're different, but genuinely appreciating them as part of what makes you specifically, unreplicably you. The world has enough people performing the expected version of themselves. What it needs, what it has always needed, is people with the courage to be genuinely, fully, unapologetically who they actually are. That is your invitation, and it's been waiting for you for a long time. Chapter 14, The Long Game, How Self-Love Compounds Over Time. We live in a culture obsessed with immediate results, with rapid transformation, with the before and after photo, the overnight success story, the dramatic turning point that changes everything in an instant. And when it comes to something as fundamental as your relationship with yourself, a relationship built over decades of accumulated experience, reinforced by thousands of repetitions, woven into the actual physical structure of your brain, the expectation of rapid, dramatic change can become its own obstacle. So let's talk about the long game, because this is where the real magic happens. The invisible growth phase. When you first begin building genuine self-love, the changes are often imperceptible. You practice self-compassion for a few weeks, and your life looks exactly the same. You work on your inner critic, and it's still very much present, still very much vocal. You set a boundary, and it feels awkward and uncertain rather than powerful and clear. This is the underground growth phase, and it is absolutely essential. Think of a tree in its first years of growth. Above the ground, progress looks slow. A few feet of height, some modest branches. But underground, invisible, an elaborate root system is forming, spreading outward, pushing deeper, building the foundation that will eventually support something enormous. Your early self-love practices are building roots, the neural pathways being laid down, the new patterns of response being rehearsed, the slowly shifting self-concept being built through accumulated small choices. All of this is happening below the visible surface. You can't see it yet, but it's real, and it's building toward something. The people who give up during this phase, who try the practices for a few weeks, notice no dramatic shift, and conclude that it isn't working, miss everything that was about to happen. Because the growth, when it comes, tends to come in waves. Gradual, gradual, gradual. And then suddenly, unmistakably, different. How the compound effect shows up. The compound effect of self-love doesn't just make you feel better, it restructures your entire life, gradually, organically, from the inside out. It shows up first in your decision-making. As your self-worth stabilizes, your choices begin to change in small but significant ways. You start saying no to the requests that drain you. Not dramatically, not with grand declarations, but quietly, in the moment, with less guilt than last time, and even less the time after that. You start saying yes to things that actually align with what matters to you, even when they feel risky or unfamiliar. Each of these small decisions creates an outcome. The outcome reinforces the pattern. The pattern becomes more natural. Over months and then years, the cumulative effect of thousands of better decisions, each one individually small, collectively enormous, produces a life that looks and feels dramatically different from the one that self-rejection was building. It shows up in your relationships. As your self-worth strengthens, your tolerance for dynamics that diminish you quietly drops, not with drama or ultimatums, but organically. You find yourself drawn to different kinds of people, people who are genuine, who are growing, who treat themselves and others with respect. You find the energy for toxic dynamics gradually disappearing, not always because the other person changed, but because you did. It shows up in your work. The confidence that comes from genuine self-respect opens doors that anxiety kept closed. You speak up in rooms where you previously stayed silent. You pursue the opportunities that previously felt too ambitious. You take the creative risks that previously felt too exposed. Each small expression of confidence, built on a foundation of self-love, makes the next one slightly easier, until showing up fully in your professional life stops being an act of courage and becomes simply what you do. It shows up in your health. When you genuinely value yourself, caring for your body stops being a chore driven by appearance anxiety and becomes an expression of respect for the life you're living. This shift in motivation from fear-based to love-based makes sustainable health habits dramatically more achievable. Because you're no longer trying to earn a body that deserves care, you're caring for a body that already does. The generational ripple. Here's the compound effect that extends furthest and matters most. The work you do on yourself doesn't stay inside you. If you have children or will, or if you have significant relationships with young people in any capacity, the self-love you build becomes part of what you model for them. Children do not learn self-worth primarily from what they're told. They learn it from what they observe, from how the adults around them treat themselves, from the relationships they witness, from the implicit messages that saturate their environment about what people deserve, how people speak to themselves, what love actually looks like. When you break the cycle, when you interrupt the transmission of self-rejection that may have been passing through your family for generations, you are doing something that extends far beyond your own life. You are changing what gets passed forward. That is not a small thing. And it's not just about your family. Every person who encounters you, who sees you handle difficulty with self-compassion, who watches you set a boundary with quiet dignity, who experiences the quality of your presence when you're genuinely comfortable in your own skin, is being given something, a model, a permission slip, a lived demonstration that it is possible to be human and also to be on your own side. Your self-love is contagious, not in a performative way, Nobody is inspired by someone loudly proclaiming how much they love themselves, but in the quiet, powerful way of genuine example, of someone who has done the real work and carries it in how they move through the world. Why starting today matters. The compound effect works in both directions. Just as consistent self-love practices accumulate into transformation over time, consistent self-rejection accumulates into damage over time. Every year you spend operating from a foundation of self-criticism, unworthiness, and self-abandonment is a year that builds the wrong architecture. The patterns deepen. The neural highways of self-rejection get wider and faster. The decisions made from unworthiness compound into a life that reflects that unworthiness back at you. This is not meant to generate urgency born from fear. It's meant to generate urgency born from genuine care for yourself. Because the best time to start this work was years ago, and the second best time is right now. Not when you feel more ready, not when things settle down, not after the next difficult chapter resolves itself into something more manageable. Now, with the understanding you have today, the tools available to you today, the version of yourself that exists in this moment. Every day you choose self-compassion over self-criticism, the trajectory changes. Every day you choose authenticity over performance, the life you're building becomes more genuinely yours. Every day you treat yourself as someone whose needs matter, whose worth is not negotiable, whose growth deserves investment. You are compounding toward something beautiful. Trust the process. The roots grow before the branches do, and the tree that grows slowly, that builds its foundation with patience and consistency, is the one that stands through every storm. Chapter 15, Becoming Your Most Loved Self. The invitation, you've arrived at the final chapter. But I want to be clear about something. This is not an ending. This is not a destination you've reached, a box you can check, a course you've completed and can now set aside. What you've built through the course of this journey is not a finished product. It's a practice, a way of moving through the world, a commitment you make to yourself, not once, but every single day, in 1,000 small moments that most people never notice. This is a graduation into a different way of being, and it begins not at some future point when you feel ready enough, healed enough, certain enough. It begins now. It begins in the next choice you make, in the next moment when the inner critic rises and you decide, deliberately, consciously, to respond differently. What your most loved self looks like. Your most loved self is not a fantasy version of you. It is not a perfected, unbothered, impossibly confident creature who has transcended all difficulty and self-doubt. Your most loved self is you, the actual, real, complex, imperfect, beautifully specific you, operating from a fundamentally different internal foundation. It's you waking up in the morning without the first thought being a criticism, without immediately cataloging everything you haven't done, everything you should be, everything you're behind on. Instead, there's a moment of simple appreciation, another day, another chance to show up for this life you're building. It's you moving through a difficult conversation and remaining present, genuinely present, rather than disappearing into anxious self-monitoring. Able to actually hear the other person, actually respond from your center, actually be there, rather than managing your performance of being there. It's you receiving criticism from a colleague, a partner, a stranger on the internet, and feeling it, genuinely feeling it without being destroyed by it. Because your sense of self does not collapse when someone disagrees with you or disapproves of you. You can consider what they've said, take what's useful, and release the rest. The ground beneath you stays solid. It's you making a significant mistake, not a minor inconvenience, but a real one, the kind that has real consequences, and moving through shame and regret into honest accountability and genuine learning. Without the weeks of self-flagellation that used to follow, without the spiral of self-attack that turned a specific mistake into sweeping evidence of your fundamental inadequacy. It's you choosing the career path, the relationship, the lifestyle that genuinely fits who you are. Even when that choice is unconventional, even when it requires disappointing someone, even when it's harder or less certain than the approved version. Because you trust yourself enough to choose your own life. It's you, simply, being on your own side, consistently, reliably, through the easy moments and the hard ones, through the victories and the failures, through the seasons when everything feels possible and the seasons when everything feels heavy. That's your most loved self, not a different person. You, with a different relationship to yourself. The daily practice, becoming your most loved self, is not a dramatic event. It is a daily practice made of small, often invisible choices. It's the choice first thing in the morning to spend 30 seconds genuinely acknowledging what you appreciate about yourself, rather than immediately reviewing your shortcomings. It's the choice when something goes wrong to ask, what do I need right now? Before what's wrong with me? It's the choice to express your honest opinion in a conversation where the easier thing would be to agree. It's the choice to say no to the request that would require you to abandon yourself, and to say it without the 20 minutes of agonized justification that used to accompany it. It's the choice, at the end of the day, to close your eyes and acknowledge genuinely, not perfunctorily, not mechanically, but with real attention. 3 things you did well, 3 ways you showed up, 3 pieces of evidence that you are a person worth being proud of. None of these choices is grand. None of them will make the highlight reel. But compounded across days, across months, across years, they are the architecture of a completely different life. What you give the world when you love yourself. There is a version of the self-love conversation that makes it sound like an essentially private undertaking about you, for you, focused on your own inner world and your own flourishing. And it is that. Genuinely, you deserve that. Full stop, without qualification, without needing to justify it by its benefits to others. But here's what's also true. The world needs this from you, not in an abstract, theoretical way, in a very concrete, very immediate way. The people in your life need the version of you that is genuinely present rather than anxiously performing. Your children, your partner, your friends, your colleagues, they need the version of you that has enough space inside to actually see them, actually hear them, actually meet them with real attention rather than the fragmented, half-present attention of someone who is constantly managing their own internal emergency. The world needs the contribution that only your specific combination of qualities, experiences, perspectives, and gifts can make. That contribution is not accessible while you're spending most of your energy on self-rejection and self-concealment. It only becomes available when you stop fighting yourself and start being yourself. The people who will be most changed by your self-love won't even know it's happening. They'll just notice that being around you feels different, that they feel slightly more permission to be themselves around you, that something in your presence gives them room to breathe. That's the quiet, profound gift of someone who has genuinely learned to love themselves. It radiates outward. It always does. The promise you make to yourself. As we close, I want to offer you something, not advice, not another framework, just an invitation to make a promise. Not a grand, sweeping promise that you'll never have a moment of self-doubt again. Not a promise to be perfectly compassionate with yourself every single day from now until forever. Those promises are made to be broken, and breaking them would just become more ammunition for the inner critic. A smaller promise, a more honest one. The promise that when the inner critic rises, and it will, because it's been building its case for years, you will pause before accepting its verdict. You will ask whether it's telling you the truth or just telling you the old story. The promise that when you make a mistake, and you will because you are human and humans make mistakes always without exception, you will speak to yourself the way you would speak to someone you love. With honesty, yes. With accountability, yes. But also with kindness. Also with the recognition that one mistake does not define you. The promise that you will keep. Showing up for yourself, not perfectly, not without backsliding, not without the occasional day when the old patterns feel more powerful than the new ones, but consistently, returning again and again to the practice of being genuinely on your own side. That's the promise, small enough to be real, large enough to change everything. The life that's waiting here is what I know about the life that's waiting for you on the other side of genuine self-love. It looks different for everyone. The external circumstances, the career, the relationships, the lifestyle, those will be shaped by your unique desires, values, and circumstances. There is no single template for what a self-loved life looks like from the outside. But from the inside, there are consistencies. There is a quality of groundedness, of feeling rooted in yourself even when the external world is uncertain or stormy. Not rigidity, not invulnerability, but a steady, reliable sense of where you stand, what you value, who you are. There is a quality of presence, of actually being in your own life rather than watching it from behind the glass of constant self-monitoring, of tasting your food, hearing your music, feeling your connections, inhabiting your experiences with the fullness of your attention. There is a quality of freedom, of making choices from genuine desire rather than fear, from authentic value rather than approval seeking, from your own center rather than the shifting expectations of everyone around you. And there is, underneath all of it, a quiet that is not emptiness, a stillness that is not numbness, the particular peace that comes from being finally and fully at home in yourself. That home has always been available to you. It was never somewhere you had to travel to. It was never a reward for doing enough, achieving enough, being enough. It is simply you, met with kindness, held with honesty, chosen again and again in 1,000 small moments. You already have everything you need for this. The question that remains, the only question that has ever really mattered, is whether you're finally ready to choose yourself. Everything you've ever wanted begins here, not out there, not later, not when you've become someone different. Here, now, exactly as you are.